Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to imagine your body as this microscopic, highly efficient manufacturing factory. Every single second of every day, it's pumping out millions of these specialized delivery vehicles, your red blood cells. And their sole job? To transport life-giving oxygen to absolutely every corner of your body. But what happens when that factory breaks down? Well, today we're demystifying the 8 distinct ways our blood production can fail, leading to a condition we broadly call anemia. To make sense of all these breakdowns without getting totally overwhelmed, we're going to use a really simple factory breakdown structure. We'll cover the basics, ingredient shortages, genetic shapeshifters, missing proteins and defenses, and finally, full-blown system failures.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the basics of anemia.
So, the core definition of anemia fundamentally comes down to one thing: a low oxygen carrying capacity in your blood. We so often think of anemia simply as having low iron or just not enough blood, but the ultimate crisis here is always about delivery. Whether your body is producing way too few red blood cells or the cells it does produce are just dysfunctional, the end result is exactly the same. Your tissues are literally starving for oxygen. And these tiny microscopic cellular errors, they translate directly into heavy physical burdens for a patient. Because your tissues just aren't getting oxygen, you experience these universal symptoms. We're talking dyspnea, which is shortness of breath, and just profound heavy fatigue. And to compensate for that lack of oxygen, your heart has to pump faster and much harder. This leads to tachycardia, an increased workload on your heart. You might even experience dizziness or syncope, which is fainting, purely because your brain simply isn't getting the fuel it needs to stay online.
Now, the absolute primary diagnostic tool doctors use here is called mean corpuscular volume, or MCV, and the magic baseline number to remember is 90 femtoliters. MCV basically measures the physical size of your red blood cells. If the cells are smaller than 90, we call it microcytic. If they're larger than 90, we call it macrocytic. It's like a clue. The size of the cell tells us exactly where the factory went wrong.
Which brings us to section 2, the ingredient shortages.
Depending on what ingredient the factory is missing, the outcomes vary wildly. Let's look at iron first. Iron is absolutely crucial for creating heme, which is the part of hemoglobin that actually holds on to the oxygen. So missing iron halts heme production, and you get these tiny, shriveled cells, a microcytic anemia, dropping under 90 femtoliters. This is super common, often caused by blood loss, heavy menstruation, or just a low iron diet. But without vitamin B12, it's a completely different story. The cell's DNA fails to properly mature and condense. The cell just keeps growing, but it can't divide properly, creating these massive, clumsy cells. That's a macrocytic anemia, pushing that MCV well over 90 femtoliters. But here's the thing. Vitamin B12 deficiency isn't always just a bad diet. Take pernicious anemia, for example. It's this fascinating, albeit frustrating, autoimmune condition. See, normally, your stomach produces a glycoprotein called intrinsic factor. Think of it like a specialized VIP escort that binds to B12 so it can actually be absorbed into your bloodstream. But in pernicious anemia, your own immune system goes rogue and produces antibodies that attack this intrinsic factor. No escort, no B12 absorption, which leads straight to that DNA maturation failure and those huge macrocytic cells. You literally have the building blocks sitting right there in your stomach, but the factory doors are completely locked.
Okay, let's move on to section 3, genetic shapeshifters.
Think about this for a second. What happens when a tiny genetic typo changes the actual physical shape of the cell? Normally, red blood cells are biconcave. They look kind of like a donut where the hole hasn't been punched all the way through, right? That makes them incredibly flexible. But in a condition called hereditary spherocytosis, the body is completely missing essential structural proteins like spectrin or ankyrin. Without these little anchoring proteins, the cell completely loses its flexibility and balloons into a rigid sphere. And that's a huge problem. These rigid spheres get trapped and destroyed in the sinusoidal capillaries of your spleen, leading to hemolysis, which is cell destruction, and an enlarged spleen, known clinically as splenomegaly.
And let's look at an even more famous shapeshifter, sickle cell anemia. Normal hemoglobin has a polar amino acid called glutamic acid sitting right at the 6th position of its beta chain. But in sickle cell, a single point mutation, a missense mutation, swaps that glutamic acid out for valine, which is hydrophobic. Just think about that. One tiny, almost microscopic chemical shift, and it changes the entire 3-dimensional structure of the hemoglobin molecule.
The real danger happens when that mutated hemoglobin drops off its oxygen. The molecules polymerize, essentially linking together and warping the entire cell into this rigid, sharp sickle shape. This sets off a highly dangerous event known as a vaso-occlusive crisis. These sickled cells act literally like logs jamming up a river, physically blocking your blood vessels. This can cause severe pain and real-world medical emergencies, like severe spleen damage or an agonizingly prolonged erection called priapism. Interestingly enough, though, there's a wild evolutionary plot twist here. This exact mutation has survived throughout history because having it actually offers patients a natural resistance to malaria. Crazy, right?
Let's keep going. Section 4. Missing proteins and defenses.
First up in this category, we have thalassemia, which happens to be much more common in people of Mediterranean descent. So hemoglobin is made up of these alpha and beta globin chains. If a genetic mutation causes you to completely miss one of these chains, resulting in either alpha or beta thalassemia, your cell volume just plummets. It is a severe microcytic anemia. In fact, these patients very often require constant blood transfusions just to maintain their baseline oxygen delivery, though bone marrow transplants do offer a potential cure.
Then we have a highly unique defense failure called G6PD-H deficiency. This one is like a biochemical domino effect. When your red blood cells are just doing their normal daily jobs, they naturally produce dangerous free radicals, reactive oxygen species. Usually no big deal. An antioxidant called glutathione neutralizes them. But glutathione needs a molecule called NADPH to recharge. And NADPH is created by the enzyme G6PD-H. So if you are genetically deficient in this specific enzyme, the whole chain collapses. You lose your antioxidant shield, and those free radicals just run rampant, directly attacking and destroying your own hemoglobin.
And we can actually see the physical evidence of this oxidative damage in the form of something called Heinz bodies. When those free radicals attack the hemoglobin, it precipitates, which basically means it clumps up, and it binds right to the inner membrane of the cell. These Heinz bodies make the cell terribly rigid. Unable to bend and squeeze its way through tight capillaries, the cell is utterly destroyed, leading to hemolytic anemia. It's just a devastating chain reaction, and it all stems from one single missing enzyme.
Finally, we've reached Section 5, System Failures.
The most straightforward system failure is hemorrhagic anemia. This is literally a direct physical loss of product from the factory. Whether it's acute, like a severe physical wound or a ruptured aortic aneurysm, or chronic, like a really slowly bleeding peptic ulcer in the stomach, the result is exactly the same. You are losing red blood cells way faster than the factory can manufacture new ones. Your oxygen carrying capacity plummets purely because the blood is literally leaving the system.
But the most terrifying system failure of all, that's aplastic anemia. Now, calling it just an anemia is actually a pretty big misnomer here. This condition is often triggered by radiation, severe viruses, or certain drugs that completely destroy the myeloid stem cells right inside your bone marrow. Because those stem cells are the source of multiple blood components, you don't just lose red blood cells, you develop pancytopenia. Because the entire factory floor is totally wiped out, you lose red blood cells, causing low oxygen, you lose white blood cells, leading to severe infections, and you lose platelets, resulting in widespread, dangerous bruising. The whole system just shuts down.
So bringing it all together, we've got our nutrient shortages causing either those tiny microcytic or massive macrocytic cells. We've got our genetic shapeshifters with their rigid spheres and polymerized vessel-blocking sickles. We have our missing proteins and collapsed antioxidant defenses. And finally, the absolute catastrophic system failures from direct blood loss or total bone marrow destruction.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought to ponder. We just saw how one single missing vitamin, or literally one replaced amino acid out of hundreds, can completely collapse your body's entire ability to deliver oxygen and keep you functioning. It really highlights the sheer, fragile wonder of the human body, doesn't it? If our blood is this incredibly complex, what other invisible, microscopic systems are perfectly firing right now, just keeping you breathing every single second? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and hey, stay curious.